The history of native rights is fraught with battles from the 1950s to today.
The 1953 Indian Termination Policy is a federal policy whose goal was to disband Native American tribes and sell their land, which was passed by the House under Truman. In 1960, over 31,000 Native Americans moved to urban areas since 1952, though it wasn't easy and many of them faced discrimination and hate. One Native American says that she was made fun of and people bullied her on her way to school. She said, "I remember they used to kick my heels all the way to school."
In response to the conditions Native Americans faced, one of the biggest Native American organizations, the American Indian Movement, or AIM, was founded in 1968. AIM's purpose was to revitalize Native American culture, giving Native Americans more rights and to help reclaim stolen lands that were once owned by natives. They organized multiple demonstrations, one of their main ones being the occupation of Alcatraz. Native Americans believed they could claim Alcatraz due to it being a quote-unquote surplus federal land, making it fall under their jurisdiction by an 1868 treaty. This demonstration lasted 19 months and spanned from 1969 to 1971. The protest was ultimately successful as it put Native American civil rights in the spotlight. They also organized other protests, including the occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973 and the Longest Walk in 1978. These protests by Native Americans were similar to those of the Civil Rights Movement due to them both being nonviolent in order to seek attention from the press. Also during this time period was the passage of the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968, which granted Native Americans rights that were a part of the Bill of Rights, something they had been fighting for. These included the right to free speech, press, and assembly, and the right to a trial with a jury. However, other civil rights, including sovereignty, had not been given to Native Americans, despite being fought for as well.
With the highest rates of unemployment, poverty, and alcoholism, as communities were left on reserves with poor quality land, unfit for agricultural or hunting processes. Some natives instead turned to operating casinos in the 1970s and 80s as a source of revenue. Because of this, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act of 1986 was established, which imposed regulations on tribal casinos but also allowed them to remain tax exempt, allowing the native community to continue enjoying a key source of income. Despite the major strides made in their civil rights in popular media, there were still depictions of natives that were deemed stereotypical by the native community. To fix this, the National Coalition of Racism in Sports and Media Forums was established, which sought to end such depictions.
One recent incident of this involved an NFL team from Washington, D.C. Now the Washington Commanders, they were once known as the Washington Redskins. Apart from the racial slur, the negative stereotypes it promoted diminishes the place, status, and humanity of modern native citizens. Some have called this name essential to the team's history and legacy in an attempt to defend it, but that history and legacy is deeply intertwined with racism. The current owner finally agreed to change it after pressure from sponsors and the public, especially after George Floyd's killing. Another recent controversy surrounds the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. It was designed to transport crude oil and also runs under the Missouri River. Activists like the group Respect Our Water say that it would harm the Sioux tribe if it leaks, as the river is their water source. They staged protests, but officials have responded to them with force numerous times, and the pipeline was unfortunately completed in 2017. Still, events such as these bring more and more attention to the civil rights movement.